right, so wanted to welcome Melissa Fitzpatrick, who is an assistant professor of business ethics and sustainability at LMU. And thank you for talking to me today. What I was hoping we would just talk about is this recent process you went through of hiring a new clinical faculty member. And I think that'll be of huge benefit to the students. So first of all, tell me about the process because you did, almost like a full, hiring a non or a tenure line. So tell me
Yeah,
about what you did and what the process was.
yeah. So that's a really good question. And in some ways, a hard question to answer only because there's not a clear clinical hiring process actually within management, at least. So I know every department, because it's a full-time position that's not tenure track. And there's different sorts of requirements. And as you probably know, just from other hires we've done with tenure track hires, everybody in the faculty votes, and it's sort of like a huge democratic process. That is tenured faculty or tenure track faculty all vote. So with a clinical, it's a little bit different. And we kind of had to think through the best way to do it that was still somewhat democratic, but not, because it's not quite the same thing as hiring someone who's going to be, again, tenured eventually. So yeah, it was figuring out sort of like what the stages of the hiring were going to be, what our criteria was going to be. That was really important because like my position, looking for someone that does business ethics and sustainability, there's sort of like three different competencies that go into it. So you have the business dimension, you have sort of like the philosophical dimension, which is the background in ethics, and then you have sustainability, which is environmental science. So our team that teaches the class is sort of like an eclectic variety of this. We have Trevor, who's like environmental science. My background's in philosophy. And then Jeff is like a good fusion where he has theological training, but he's worked in sort of like the corporate space. So he knows it really well. So we work together to find our strengths. So when we were looking for someone to fill this position, in the end, we knew we wanted someone that had philosophical competency, but was still able to speak to a business audience and was able to kind of like learn effectively the different dimensions of the class, because it's ultimately a teaching position, not a research position, even though there's some research dimensions that are a part of it. So this is a roundabout way of answering your question where we had to kind of build the process out where we're like, okay, we're going to create a search committee that has the different strengths that we're looking for. We're going to all review all of the applications that we get. We're going to create a long list. We're going to Zoom interview the long list to create our short list. And then with the short list, we had to decide in the end, the dean was able to let us bring them on campus to meet them in person, which we're very grateful for because that's an important part of like understanding how and who to hire. But we were kind of creating the process as we go and sort of building out the criteria as we went as well. Yeah.
Great. And so when you first looked at the candidates, what were you looking for and what did they provide?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I know the team decided that we did want someone who had we appreciated the integration with business, but we were looking more for degrees that had an emphasis in philosophy, so terminal degrees in philosophy or terminal degrees in environmental science or environmental ethics. That's sort of the part that we thought, but we were open. We were open also to terminal degrees in business as well, but we wanted to continue building out sort of like the philosophical dimension because this is the only ethics class that business students get. So having someone, they used to take ethics with people in philosophy. So this is sort of our chance to give them like a pretty strong philosophical grounding. So we kind of decided we were looking for sort of like that terminal degree. We wanted ideally someone who had at least a couple publications under their belt, like they're doing research, and it didn't necessarily have to be in business ethics and sustainability, but some sort of like research that they were doing on the side, and then a track record in teaching. That was really, really important because they will be teaching a 3-3. So we want someone who the students are going to connect with and someone who's sort of like a master teacher.
Great. And
Ideally in applied ethics, but we knew that my own hire, just to say a little bit about my backstory, I'm trained in philosophy. So there was a certain point where I had to make that transition to being like a philosophy person and then to come into the business world and become a business ethicist. So we were open to people that didn't necessarily have tons of experience in business schools, but were at least attuned to the application of theory. That's kind of like the most important thing.
right, right. And you mentioned having published. have to be academic journals, or were you open to practitioner journals?
We were open to practitioner journals, but that was the part of the criteria that was not the most murky, but it's something, as you know, CBA has to kind of like crack down on the credentialing, just sort of like making sure we meet what we're expected to meet to stay in R2. And we wanted people who at least had the potential to publish in peer-reviewed journals, but it didn't have to be sort of like business list top peer-reviewed journals, but that do that sort of work. So the answer is like yes, but better if they already had peer-reviewed works that had been published, or at least things that were under review. But just anything really to show that they kind of have that impulse and maybe had the potential to be able to publish in peer-reviewed journals as well.
Right, good. And then did you, I assume you expected a CV and
Yes. Yeah.
their list of, publications. But then when you brought them in, did you have them do a job talk?
No. So that was the thing is we decided that originally before we got the okay that we could bring them on campus, which the dean decided was important because this is a mission related hire. This is sort of like the moral courage ethics aspect of who we are as a college. And originally we were going to have them do a teaching demo on Zoom, which I think all of our candidates were happy that they didn't have to do that they were able to do it in person. But yeah, we kind of toyed with what exactly we wanted to do. So we decided we wanted it to be a teaching demo, but something that brought them a little bit out of their comfort zone. And what I mean by that is we knew that all of them were going to be strong in one area that we were looking for, but maybe not as strong in others, right? So maybe they had a background in moral philosophy, but they don't work on sustainability, or they do business ethics, but they've never thought about the corporate sustainability piece. So we wanted to challenge them with a teaching demo that like forced them to think a little bit outside of what they would normally do. And we were not closed off to the idea of them incorporating aspects of what they were interested in research wise into that talk, but it was still for a student audience. That was the point.
Oh, great. So
Yeah.
tell me about what that teaching demo, like logistically, how long, what was
Yeah.
expected, and what was differentiating about the candidate
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So it was, I believe the time that they were allotted was an hour and 15. That's like murky to me now because there was like different, the original demo we were going to give, I think it was something like 40 minutes. And this is hard too because as you know, we teach in different time increments here. So like twice a week, you have an hour 40. So I think we settled on something that was a bit more than an hour, assuming that the demo itself would be like about an hour, and then there'd be some time for Q&A after from faculty and also from students. And again, the challenge was like, how well can the candidates hit all the different pieces of what this class is about and what we tasked them with? So I didn't say this answering the last question, but we wanted them to talk about some normative ethical theory. So just a fancy way of talking about a theory of what we ought to do and why we ought to do it, and to apply that to an issue in environmental sustainability in business. So there was kind of like different pieces they had to pull. And we wanted, I think what we realized we were looking for, because we weren't exactly sure what we were going to get and how each candidate was going to do this, because it wasn't a set classroom. Like they didn't come to our classes. We invited kind of like an A crew of students to come and sit and observe, and faculty were there as well. So we were looking for candidates that could distribute their time well, hit all the different aspects, even though in an actual classroom, like they may not have to do all of that at the same time. They'd have more time, they could work through that. But how quickly they were able to hook students, how well they were able to describe the theory. And then, of course, the most important piece was how well they were able to apply that theory to something real in business, that students could kind of like start to see the importance of ethics within the types of careers that they'll be pursuing.
And how important was the pedagogy itself, like the activity, learning objective, connection, and some of the, how you actually teach students?
Yeah, the pedagogy in the end, when we were assessing the candidates, ended up being the most important thing that we were looking for.
Wow.
So this is something that I think we were not sure about going in, but this is something too where teacher scholars, so LMU is sort of like a teacher scholar model where they want us all to be both and to be really good at both, right? Which is a really hard line to balance. And it's interesting because the stereotypes are true. Like people who are excellent at research do tend to be weaker as teachers. And it's just because we're finite, right? Like we spend our time on one thing more than another. So it's like, how do we find that sweet spot? And it's interesting because among the candidates we chose, there was one candidate that was like, could easily get a tenure track job with the amount of publications that they had. And then we had another candidate that was totally on the other side of the spectrum. That was like clearly a master teacher within Jesuit schools, understands sort of like Ignatian pedagogy, but had not done research, took sort of like a dip. They had one publication, they took a step out of academia, homeschooled their kids, started an organization doing like after school programming. So it was kind of funny because actually they had business experience to an extent, but didn't fully understand themselves like that because they were a philosopher by training. So your question's an important one because when we kind of sat down and thought like, what are we looking for? Pedagogy ended up being sort of like, who's the one that's going to inspire our students to care about ethics and like to go on out into the world and like make the world a better place. And that sort of ended up being the most important criterion, which we were not sure was going to be. We were not totally sure exactly how that would play out, but yeah,
Interesting. So
yeah,
tell me about when you were selecting each stage. What were some of the standout things? And then, really
yeah,
importantly, what were some of the things where you just shook your head and said, this person isn't seeing themselves? Because I think that would
totally.
be very beneficial for students to understand.
Yeah, no, and this is like the important plug that I want to put in here because I think what this was my first time on an extensive search committee. So it's my third year at LMU. I'm junior, so I've not done this many times. So it was really eye-opening. And I think coming in a bit naive was useful because I think maybe I came to it with like a lot more earnestness, maybe than people who had done this. So, and they realized just like you can't, you can't cover everything. So like, what are the things that are important to you? And with the long list interviews, we had nine. I think we had nine total candidates that we did Zoom interviews with. And for me personally, their understanding of fit, like how well they understood exactly what we were looking for and how well they were able to express wanting this particular job. And it was amazing to me, Kelly, how few people were able to do that well. Like I was surprised. You would think people applying to like a very niche job like this, it's like teaching heavy, background in philosophy, speaking to a business crowd, how many people miss that? Where like they were just talking about their research in philosophy, or they were just talking about their research in environmental science, or totally just going for the business piece. And it's like, wow, it's almost like they didn't read and process the job description. And for me, that seemed so basic, where it's like the candidates that stood out to me were the ones that from the beginning, where again, whether I know that so many people, especially in academia, you're sending your application out to like tons of jobs, like in some cases, like 100 jobs, right? And it's like there's only so many people. So there's a reality to the fact that you can't tailor craft every single thing perfectly, right? But when you get to the point of the interview, you should, right? By then, you should be able to at least like show and present yourself as someone that wants this particular job and to be excited about it, to be excited about the possibility of getting this particular job. And for me, that was sort of like the heaviest criterion that I was looking at, where I'm like, I don't feel compelled to give someone a shortlist seat who can't even do kind of like that extra work of showing that they really understand like what this position's about, the mission of the college, right? Like I remember applying for jobs and it's like, oh, make sure you include the mission. And like it's just one of those things you add, but I'm like, no, it's like actually among the most important things to think about and bring up because it shows that you get it and it shows that you can fit within the community and that you want to be a part of the community in an authentic way. So the short list ended up being people that were one way or another able to show that passion, understanding for the fit, like wanting this job here, because that's the kind of person we want interfacing with our students and like helping them understand the type of content that we teach in this class.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's really great. And it's hard, right? Because the nuances, a lot of people say that they have a mission for good and things like that, but really understanding what that means in this particular environment, because we know, I mean, we're here because it's special and we know it's special, but for someone on the outside to be able to recognize that and then tailor what they've got just to get in the door to make sure that they understand where they're applying to and
Oh
why.
yeah, this is just to give one anecdote without getting, I don't want to get into too much specifics, but it's interesting because it's like we had one candidate and this person was clearly a teacher, like a master teacher, but had taught at top research institutions her entire career. And like, is she going to be happy at a school like LMU, right? Which is different. It's like we have great scholars, but it's not an R1 research. That's not the kind of institution that it is. And you're also not going to get the same kind of students that you would get at like MIT or like a, right? So it's like, there were so many aspects of the interview that like worked well. But when we asked sort of the mission related question and also like why this job, like that's asking for someone with expertise in ethics to come into a business school and speak to business students, it's like everything fell apart, right? It was just like, we know this person's a good teacher, but I don't know that they understand what it would mean to be here. And like, I don't know that this is where they actually want to be, right? So there was a tough decision with one particular candidate where it's like, this seems like a great teacher, but I don't know that they get it. And I don't know that this is what they want, right? And like, I ended up taking that really, really seriously. And so did my colleagues on the search committee, but it was kind of like, they either get it or they don't. And that's not something that I think you can fake really well. It's like, and then it comes back to sort of a deeper question of like, what kind of jobs are we applying to? And should we only be applying to jobs that we could actually see ourselves in, somewhere that we want to be, which is a really, really hard question to answer because the job
Right.
market is what it is, right?
Right, exactly. It's interesting too. I think you make a really good point about the difference in the types of institutions and the way teaching gets done because somebody in an R1 school that has a ton of resources may not be individually giving feedback, may not be doing the grading, for example, and may not be
Exactly.
doing lecture prep and may not be running the labs and may not be, there's so much that we do here and I know this because I have my own children go to different types of schools and they're like, we can't believe how much time you spend with your students, giving feedback, like taking their
Mhm.
exams. And it's not a Scantron here. Like we're filling out all the feedback and telling them how to do better. And
Totally.
they just, my kids are blown away by it because that's not the experience they're getting. And so if people don't
Exactly.
know that's what this particular school is like, it's going to be really challenging for them to, as you say, express that they really want to be here.
That's exactly right. It's true. It's sort of like the 150 student lecture hall is not an LMU classroom. And like we know our students' names, right? Like that's an important part. And then there were some candidates where it's like that's the way they described who they were as a teacher. So you could already see they're kind of getting it, right? They're kind of getting that this is not just like I come in, I lecture, someone else is grading exams. Like we're dealing with all the individual souls. That's like what we do at LMU. It's why we want to work at an institution like this.
Right, exactly. Well, so what is your advice? Somebody who's coming out of a DBA, and needs to know sort of how to navigate this. How would you recommend they prepare?
That's a really good question and a really hard question to answer because I know maybe the answer that I'm going to give is going to sound like a little too obvious or like easier said than done. But I do think that one of the things that speaks loudest to every human, like maybe there's some sort of like, they have their nose in the books and they care about the research, the numbers, the institutions, the credentials, and that's all they're looking at. But I think the thing that speaks to most humans is sort of the passion, joy, and love for whatever it is that you want to do. And that's always been my road. That's been my rule of thumb. And maybe it's a personality thing, but I've always gone in being like, I want this. I'm someone you want to work with. And I'm like energetic and ready to bring that to the table. And I think that's something that's palpable where even if there's certain skills and qualifications that you don't have or that you need to prove yourself with, in the end, people want to hire people they want to work with. People want to hire people that they like to be around. And I think sort of like to use philosophical language, virtue and character speaks louder than anything else. And like at the end of the day, I think that's something that you can't fake and that's something that people have to see. So like if there's ways for you to bring that sort of passion and love and sort of like earnest concern for whatever it is that you want to do, I think that helps you stand out because, at least in my experience on the search committee, and also my experience being a candidate for jobs, I know that that's something that's made me stand out in relation to others. Because it's like, no, we want to work with you. No, you're someone that it's like, we want an energetic person that's going to sort of like ignite not just the students, but like all of the people around them. And I think that, of course, don't be fake. Like if you don't, if that's not how you are, you don't feel that way. Of course, it's a hard thing to, I'm not saying like to be fake about it, but that sort of like love and passion is not something that should ever be held back, because I think it's sort of like a universal language for humans. And like people who are looking to hire people, they want to hire people that they like, and they want to hire people that they want to work with. And I think the capacity to do things and to see potential, because that's another thing that I heard a lot of when I was on the job market. It's like, you don't have to know how to do everything, but you need people that are going to buy into your ability to learn quickly or to be able to like pick up whatever you need. I think there's something about that energy and enthusiasm that sits with that, where it's like, no, this person will like in grace take on whatever we ask them and do the best that they can. And like, they're the kind of person we want to help mentor and get to that place. So I guess like short version of the answer is to let sort of like your character shine, because I do think that that can speak louder than accolades and credentials and all of those other things that a lot of people have, but not everybody has the character piece.
Right, right. Well, that's great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. I think
Of
this was
course.
extremely valuable for students, and I really appreciate you sharing it, especially having just gone through this
Yes.
experience.
And it's a long and intense process. So again, like the things I was saying, like the louder those aspects can be, makes it easier for the people on the other side who have a lot of people that they're sifting through.
That's a great point. Make it
Ah,
easier on them.
totally.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And good luck to everyone.